Well, hello everybody! Today is day 3 of Blenduary, at least at the time of recording, and the word for today is workshop. I didn't really want to make like a traditional workshop because that would involve downloading assets of like tools, and that's just not really my style anyway. I thought I would make something that maybe is my style. Instead of using Blender on a screen like this, what if you could step into Blender like it was an actual space, a little workshop? And I thought that would be cool. You might have like holograms and screens in different places. Of course, I only have a day to do this, so I'm going to try to not to get too detailed. This idea is a little bit different. I'm not as confident about this one as the last couple of days where I just did kind of like nature scenes. So instead of letting you watch me stumble around and mutter to myself as I try to figure out how I'm doing this, today's video will be actually more of a time lapse. Along the way, I'll kind of walk you through what I'm doing. So let's start with the time lapse. I had thought of a project like this in the past, but I never got around to doing it because I always imagined that I would be like modeling every single button of the UI, kind of like CG Cookie has done, where they've made like the 3D version of the UI. But I decided since I wanted to do something like that and I only had a day to do it, I thought I will set up different workspaces and just take screenshots of that and then have this room be filled with these giant screens on the wall that have those different workspaces on them. So it's not modeling every single button, which is what I assumed that this workshop would, have like actual physical buttons. As I went through this, I decided it actually looked kind of cool to just have like kind of screens on the wall. I liked it anyway. So here what you see me doing is a couple of things. I'm just using the same file. I have some different workspaces set up for the different screens that I want for myself to take screenshots of. And I'm also going around my bedroom with my measuring tape, kind of taking measurements and using my bedroom as kind of a reference of how big I want the room and how big I want the screens. In real life, I have a 42-inch, I believe, TV screen that I use as my second monitor connected to my laptop. So I measured that and I decided that something twice the size, twice the width and twice the height would be a good screen size, and it also worked out with the pixels. So it's like there's 1 pixel per real world millimeter. So I could kind of work with those measurements. So here you see me setting up the room now that I have the size of the screens and the room kind of defined, and I also made some sketches in my sketchbook to kind of help me decide how I wanted the room to be laid out, what screens I wanted on what side of me, like if I'm standing at the station that is like the 3D view, and what screens I would want on my left hand and on my right hand, and also like on the little table underneath me. And I also decided to create 2 doors here. I decided that one of the doors is the entrance from the outside world into this little workshop, and then the other door I decided will actually be my asset browser instead of it like being displayed on a screen. Although I imagine I could have it that way if this were real. I could make it appear on a screen too, but I decided it would be cool to have a room that is the asset browser. So like you walk through this door, like you step into this warehouse and you have all your assets. Of course I didn't actually model that part, but that's the indication anyway. That's what's behind one of the doors. Another thing I wanted is the lighting in this room to be represented by lines of light. I am just totally in love with the style of the movie Tron Legacy. I just love the lines of light on all of the characters and objects and architecture, and I wanted something like this here. And then here you also see me setting up some of the screenshots a little bit more. Now, one thing I did do for the screen that is going to be my 3D view, I kind of wanted it to look like a window, so it's not like just a picture on the screen, but it's actually 3D, like you can look through it. So what I did is I took 2 screenshots of my little workspace that I had as my 3D view. In one screenshot, I had the world background set to white, and in the other screenshot, I had the world background set to black. And you'll see why I did that. At first, I was going to try to render this in Eevee because I was hoping to make it an animation, and I didn't on the day, but maybe for this video, I will make it into an animation. I hope I will, because I love this scene so much. I started kind of setting up some lights, and I just added like this square-shaped light at the top, and I didn't really like that. Here you see me setting up the thing that I took those 2 screenshots, one where the background is white and the other is black. I mixed them together but set the mix type to difference, and that way the parts of the image of those 2 images that are different, which it was the background, that part would get kind of attributed, and then I just plugged that into the alpha of the principled material, so that way those areas would be see-through, and it also preserved the dark area around the little camera outline. So that was a fun little trick. But here I'm just setting up some of my panels. I decided I would have little tables underneath that have a screen on them as well, and then I'm just messing around with the room a little bit more, trying to prepare for some idea that I sort of have brewing for how to add lights, and also some panels. I wanted there to be those lines of light, like I said, but I also wanted there to be like different shades of gray panels around, and I wanted to use a similar technique for that, which I'm actually quite proud of, which again, you will see shortly. But yeah, one of the fun things too is you can of course walk around in your scene. Like here, my parents came over and they wanted to see what I was working on, so I showed them. That's the fun thing about Blender is of course you can go into walk mode, so you can actually like walk around your little scene, especially if you render it in Eevee or maybe you have the viewport set to material preview, then you don't have to wait for it to render so much, and you can anyway. So that's just the fun part. You can kind of just walk around the scene, and for me that was just really fun to kind of pretend that this was real and make more decisions about how I wanted the room to look. So I decided to start setting up the little 3D scene, the scene within the scene that like you would be working on in this little workshop. And I didn't know what I wanted to do. I thought I maybe wanted to do like a 3D Bob Ross painting kind of thing with like mountains and trees, maybe a little lake or something, but that would just be a lot. I didn't want to burden myself with that, being as I only had a day to do this, and I did land up spending about 5.5 hours on this actually. And also the little 3D scene wasn't the focus, so I decided that maybe I should just do something simple. So I decided to just add some sand dunes and have the sun lamp shining through, and that's kind of the fun part. You can actually see the sunlight coming through and hitting the wall on the other sides because that 3D view screen is actually like a window, so like that's also kind of fun. And just to make it a little bit interesting, I decided that I would have Suzanne be like this big stone monument that's kind of been left behind in the desert. Actually, one of the other words of the day later on in January was artifact. I wasn't able to do it in January, but we are repeating Blenduary in February, so if you missed some days or all of the days in January, I also missed that day, so maybe I'll make something similar to that little scene actually for that day. But here I'm just making Suzanne look like she's actually made out of stone. I'm setting up the material for that, and then using some bump maps, and I'm using a Voronoi texture to make it look like there's kind of cracks in the stone and whatever. One of the things I like to do a lot is I'll use a texture, but then I will take that texture and split it. As long as it has 3 channels in it, they're different from each other. And then you can split those apart and use them as like different maps. So like you can use one for like a bump map, you can use one for a specularity map, you can use one for a roughness map, you know, whatever. So that's what I did here. I put a texture that would make Suzanne look like she was like quarried out of like some area of rock that has layers in it. So, you know, slightly different colors in the layers. And I think I incorporated that into the bump map a little bit too. This file is available on my Patreon. So if you want to download it, then you can explore it, but you can also use some of the other stuff in here you'll get to use as well. But yeah, here I'm just updating some of the screenshots that I took because I wanted the names of the objects like Suzanne and the sand dunes to show up in there, so that way it's consistent. It looks like what's on this 3D view is actually on the other screens. So I just took some other screenshots and updated those and then edited them, made sure I had the one for the 3D view with the black background and the white background so that mask would still be created to give us the transparency. And then I'm applying those again to the different screens. So then here I start messing around with the important part, which was the lights. I finally decided on a good way to make the lights. I wanted the lights to kind of wrap around the room and like go across the edges and the corners between the walls and stuff like that, but I didn't want to have to mess with the topology of the room, like to preserve the bevel that I created to the corners. I created a system in geometry nodes where I could use a separate object, and then I could use that to create the shape and the directions that I wanted the lines of light to follow. Then I took that object, gave it a solidify modifier and also a bevel modifier so that the lines of light don't have just sharp corners, but they're a little bit curved. And that's what you see me doing now. So I'm just plotting out the shape of the lines of light, but I'm not using that actual object as the light. I'm just using it to Boolean the mesh that I'm using for the actual room, the walls and the ceiling and the floor. Whatever is cut away, I Boolean it the opposite way and then bring those sections that were Booleaned out back in. I can assign a different material to them, or alternately I can just assign a different attribute to them to like assign a different color or something in the materials. I just had fun kind of laying out how I wanted the lines of light to wrap around the room. Sometime back I watched a video that kind of analyzed the movie Tron Legacy. In the artist world, of course, we know we can use lines to like draw the viewer's attention to where we want them to look in the image or the scene. I watched this video that talked about how actually Tron Legacy was very interesting in that regard, because that whole movie they basically used that throughout the whole movie. They used those lines of light to direct the audience where they wanted them to look because of that feature that they, in their world building, that they gave that world. Like that was quite unique actually among other movies because of that feature that world has. I was kind of thinking of that here as I was laying out how I wanted the lines of light to line up, not only thinking about like how I wanted to direct the viewer's attention, but like also just imagined myself walking in there as if it were a real environment that I could actually work in, and like how I would want the lines of light to like direct me to different workstations to work in, or like maybe wrapping around the doors, so it's like it would kind of make me want to kind of avoid the doors and stay away from the doors, so it's like I get more work done and I stay in this little room. Like you don't want to walk out that door. You don't want to go back to the real world. We want to stay here in Blender universe, in Blender world. I did land up refining the direction that I have all the lines of light going. After this day, I finished it and I posted it on the 3rd, but I loved this project so much that even the next days when I was working on my other Blenderberry projects, I returned to this file and like kept messing with it. I love this project so much. I'm sure I'm going to keep it around. Maybe this little room is part of a big spaceship or something, a big Blender spaceship, and this is just one of the rooms, one of the workstations or something. And then here I had a couple of screens that are like a table underneath the other screens, but I realized that they were still paper thin. I decided to add some support underneath those panels. I just made them sort of flat and then added kind of a circular part that connects to the wall. I wanted to make it part of the rest of the room so that it would inherit the same bevel, but I decided it was easier just to make it its own object. And I tried to add a bevel modifier too, but just the way the topology was, it didn't work very well, so I landed up just adding the bevel in edit mode so I could actually make sure it turned out right. Now here you see me using the same technique as I used on the lights. Again, I wanted there to be lighter gray panels throughout the room to kind of add a little bit more interest. It's a lighter shade of gray that I also color picked from Blender's UI. I'm just using a new modifier that was the same type of modifier that I made for the lights with that same geometry node set up in it. And then I'm using another object to now outline where I want those lighter gray panels to be. I love the style of these lines of light, and I guess having panels kind of goes along with that style too. So I'm probably going to use this in the future if I want to add lines of light to architecture or objects without having to worry about the topology and all that. Except in this case, instead of assigning the Boolean portions a different material like I did for the lights, I just assigned those Boolean portions a different attribute that I could use in the shaders to just assign and mix a different color. So I have the dark gray, and then where the attribute is, it's a lighter gray. And then here I'm just kind of refining the scene and walking around it again and updating some of the screenshots. And here I opened up a new instance of Blender and turned up the size of the icons as big as they would go, and took another screenshot so that I could get this little asset browser icon as well as the little world icon, because I wanted to use those on the doors, but I wanted those icons to be really big. In order to make those icons not pixelated and make them sharp, I just passed them through a math node that was greater than, and then mixed the original colors back in. This was such a fun project. In the following days, I did land up returning to this file. I changed the lines of light and kind of refined where I wanted those to be. I also made some updates to the doors so that the little icons appear on a little circle that's like a button you can press, and the doors open when you press that button. I don't know if there will really be bloopers for this one because it was a time-lapse today, and with this voiceover, I don't know, there might be a few. After the bloopers, you will also see a teaser of the next video. If you support me on Patreon, I really appreciate that, because my goal is to make this channel make a living off of it, at least a part of my living and maybe all of my living someday. Once I get a few more watch hours, then you may see a join button down there where you can actually support me on YouTube. But even if you're not able to do that, I appreciate you watching and liking this video so that the algorithm knows that people like my videos, and maybe that'll help. But we will see you in the next video. So let's start with the time-lapse. Yeah, I guess I have to end the recording and start over again if I'm gonna do that, don't I? Get the mic in a good... Oh, press the spacebar over the wrong application. I paused the recording and I stopped the recording instead of the... I've tried recording this voiceover like 2 times. This is the 3rd time, because the first time I just didn't like the way the voiceover turned out. My hair does look kind of stupid. And then the second time, this morning when I tried to record it, I went through the whole thing. I sat down to do the editing. I realized that the recording didn't even capture the audio because my microphone got disconnected or something somehow. So it's a different, what's the word? Asset. It's not asset. I use it all the time. Attribute of it were assigned a different... Oh, I just forgot the word again. Asset. Not asset. It starts with an A. It's a... Why can't that word stick in my head? Asset. No, it's not asset. It does start with an A, but it's not asset. That's another concept. I just said it. Attribute. Keep that word in your head. Attribute. Good grief. My brain is like a sieve. And let's see a teaser for what the next video will be about. Or having it. Or whatever. I don't know how to English.